Hello, it's 11 o'clock in Los Angeles, 2 o'clock in New York, and 7 in the evening in Great Britain. We're gathering our gang. We're going to take a step back, arrange things along the lines of the classic battle of good and evil, and where the priest is a good guy and the pimp is a bad guy, where people who hustle, con, manipulate, and intimidate people are considered the bad guys in malice. And the priest, the good guys, they straighten themselves up emotionally. Your race relegated to an endearing quality of your parents. These thoughts that fly through your head that have to do with fear and sex and ignorance and violence, uh, you straighten those your emotions out, and you will the good of another person. You become a good person, and then if you want a profession of a husband, and then a good father, or a wife, and then a good mother, and then it spills into home economics. And to that end, if you're the young gal, the gals we're trying to uh, recruit, get into our gang, we're going to try and get you to chat, use the live chat, and ask how much of a family budget do you need to make ends meet. They're way beyond tears of trying to put their child into a daycare center so they can work ungodly hours and come up with enough rent and money and then daycare fees just so they can watch somebody else raise their own child. And they're going to start having reparations in this direction. Remember, the women's liberation movement didn't discriminate for or against women, but rather in favor of women who were malicious and against women who practiced virtue, who went back and asked the 10-year-old what he wanted for his birthday. And they paid a terrible price. They caused poverty. They caused an increase in the amount of hours that everybody has to work. And now you're paying the price for this, and you're in dire straits. And the same with the guy. How many hours do you have to work in order to come up with a family budget? First off, let's remind ourselves of all those fires in Los Angeles and wish the very best. And hopefully somebody's listening. Remember, we have a couple of YouTube channels here and about 3 dozen short anecdotes. And to skip a bit, look for the silver lining. If you could just get the people who caused the prices in California to skyrocket so much so that they were homeless, and all the other people that fall in that group, Harry the hippie and Al the Afro and Donna the feminist, and you turn around and you find yourself with absolutely nothing in a devastated landscape. Well, use our tactics and join our gang. You're the ones that take over the city planning department, and then you can just imagine the world you could build. You could build a world straight out of a movie set in Los Angeles, starting fresh, knowing all the things they did wrong and knowing all the things that were so right. You could picture, I was staring at one of those fields that were houses level to the ground, and you can just picture you, the stereotypical home economist. You can picture a house in the middle of that, a fresh, clean house, maybe an Eichler house if you know what they are. And it's big enough to get people out of poverty and into plenty. That's the definition of getting out of poverty, home economics. And you can just picture the guy. You go out to remind ourselves, you go out to the side, and you start with farming and mining, and then manufacturing, and then wholesale, retail, and repair, and then retirement, education, and recreation. And doctors and lawyers form a kind of lattice that holds it all together. And the Catholic priest is what causes it all to come into being to begin with, God and country. And if you got our gals, you into the city planning department, and the guys, you could just see a beautiful new world being built. You get those actors out of those beautiful hills and turn them back into something that you can all enjoy. Perhaps the daydream, stick some cows in there so we have beef in the supermarkets, and you could go to town. So always look for the silver lining. Perhaps one of the best things you could do right now is go throw those scoundrels out of that city council and city planning department and all those other places, and you take over the place and you go back to God and country. And then you take over the city planning department, go to work. Picks and shovels are in the back of the truck, Bob, and then call in and let us know. Let us know how to do it. The same thing if you happen to be living here, hearing this, excuse me, and you're in England someplace or Great Britain, and you just can't make ends meet. You don't know what you're going to do. Well, or you know someone, grab them and have them start chiming in on the live chat. We need this much if you live in Tullsbury, England, to get everybody into a world of plenty. And if you're a guy, remember, this is home economics. We don't pay rent to people. We don't rent property from people. We own our own house. And so how many hours do you have to work in order to get from where you are to where you're going? Home, you can just see we have about 3 dozen videos in our 2 YouTube channels, and so we're going to ramble in the good sense of the word and try and get you to sort of take charge, and we're going to have our own plan. We know exactly what's wrong, exactly what to do about it, and exactly how to do it. And let me remind myself that in the 50s here in the United States, the Communist Party came out and said they would overthrow the United States by about the year 1973. And in the early to mid 70s was when there was a profound change in our country. And that's what you have to go back and look at. In philosophy, they threw out those 3 things that make up God and country: arranging things to get to heaven after you die, holding Christ's divinity as faith, and then straightening out your emotions. I close my eyes, I fantasize about the gals. I do it again, only this time I'm fantasizing about actually getting the gal pregnant, and I realize that's not a natural thing, and that's a very important, profound sense of original sin. So I straighten myself up that way. And then willing the good of another person. And those 3 things form a line, and Christ forms the dot on that line, which causes everything to come together. A short manual version of God and country, where people who are normal and well-adjusted make up the citizenry, and on the other side is a people who hustle, con, manipulate, and intimidate people. They're the bad guys in our world. And that includes you. If you're going to be first a good citizen, and then a wife, since we're trying to get the gals to start chiming in, and then a good mother. It's for society to put you at the top of society and put the nun. You come into existence because the nuns come into existence. And you're supposed to be the ones at the top of society. You're supposed to be the ones that have all the commercials and everything geared towards. You're supposed to be the one playing in that silly tennis tournament they have every year. Once the kids start to get in school and you start to have recreation time, it's for you to play, a professional mom to play amateur tennis. And it should be that way, shouldn't it? You can align things up that way. In other words, you choose motherhood as a profession, and it's a very profound profession. And if that's you, then you go learn how to raise kids, and you learn how to run a house as a business. And if you're going to do that, you get to be the owner of the house, and you get to play in that silly tennis tournament. As an example, after World War II in the United States, when they were trying to do things so terribly right, and they were becoming quite successful at it, the standard of living for the average Joe in the United States in the 1950s was so far above everybody else in the world that it was silly. In fact, the definition of middle class has a completely different meaning here in the United States than the other countries, even in Europe and even in the communist countries. Remember, communism is the prima donna intellectuals government. It's horrible. And I drifted a bit, but in the 1950s, all the advertising was geared towards the housewife. She did the overwhelming majority of consuming. And then in the 60s and 70s, they considered that oppressive. And who did? Well, the feminists, the gals who practiced malice. And the guys, and what did they do? They cashed in on everything, went up in the foothills, and became the upper class in a peasant and property class society. I get to ramble a bit more. That decision, when you reach that fork in the road where you have a chance to go live in the foothills and be the upper class, or you could stay in the middle class and everybody else becomes better off. You make money by making people better off. And so you're in the middle class, even if that's living in a doctor and lawyer's house, or maybe a much nicer house if you're the one that can build the factory. You push people ahead that way. And it's just a choice. And to be candidly honest, and all the famous people like Aristotle and Plato and all those things, the highest standard of living you can have, if there's no world beyond ours, is to be a psychopath and a scoundrel living in the foothills, doing all the consuming, and everybody living in the valley doing all the producing. American slavery is just that. It's also communism. You sort of have to wake up to it. The cruel, queer, atheistic, communist, and fascist. And you notice that, like the movie, the TV show, The Twilight Zone, they say it's everything for the masses. And then you walk down that road and find you're the one living in the slave quarters, and they're the ones living in the foothills, living in the big house. You notice also that they have housing projects everywhere throughout the world, and everybody complains about them. Yes, the architects, the honest ones, and they'll say, well, you have to build a house with certain conditions. If it's too small here and there, you can build a house that the couple will be divorced in 9 months, or you can build a house so they'll live happily forever. And those housing projects, they just crammed as many people as they possibly could into them, and the class of intellectuals, the intelligentsia, they moved into the foothills, and they live very high off the hog. And you and I are stuffed into housing projects, and they're horrible. The same is true with apartments. You can see over time, making the apartments smaller and smaller and trying to cram as many people as they can. And there's economics behind that. That's how slums are built. They keep putting smaller and smaller apartments, and the apartments themselves go up in price, so you can never afford to own one, and you have to rent. And over time, it gets worse and worse. And then you realize that whether they're called housing projects or slums, they're the same thing. And so to go back from the 1950s, they're the cruel, queer, atheistic, communists, and fascists. Oh yeah, there are a bunch of queer, and yep, that's true. I think that 1950s expression is terribly important. We'll come back over here. We'll be the American Yank, and we'll include those great Brits with us. And we'll will the good of another person. We straighten ourselves up emotionally, and then we make money by putting people in their own business. Parameters of competition. If you arrange the parameters of competition so that there'll be a large middle class, there'll be a large middle class. If you arrange the parameters of competition, if you breed a breed of normal, well-adjusted people, over time there'll be a breed of normal, well-adjusted people. And so all the rules about evolution apply if you wanted to be this side of things and do it the Catholic way, except it's an unnatural thing, and it requires some emotion and infusion of things that are in some people, and that stereotypical common housewife from the 1950s, and that guy as well. That infusion is called religion, or holding that is called faith. So if you hold that as faith, then you wouldn't be an SOB and cash in on everything and go up to the upper class and cause poverty. You would, however, be a doctor, live in a doctor and lawyer's house and that sort of thing. And you would get everybody out of poverty. And that decision is a decision between a religious one, a Catholic one, where you have at the very beginning a sense of free will, and you realize you don't even have a sense of free will, and then you're a normal, well-adjusted person, and that's the religious argument, and then you have a normal supply and demand curve, and that's the religious argument. It's as opposed to the complete absence of love. Yeah, I can't stand the word, so you have to forgive me for that, but what's ever in the sheriff of Dodge City, where he stands up for the poor and the oppressed, the complete absence of that is these university intellectuals. And along with that, a monopoly supply and demand curve and individual rights. I think they really put one over on us. And so if you happen to be listening to this and you happen to be perhaps a gal with 2 teenage sons or daughters, and you've got to come up with dentists. How much is a dentist? You have to come up with clothing and all the things you need. It just isn't going to work out. You've got to start getting our act together and joining our gang, and then you can do something about it. What's wrong? They threw out God and country. What do I do about it? Well, courts in the United States came out in the mid-70s and said we shall have no religion in government. And the shop manual version of that is they institutionalized pulling a bum's rush. They threw out those 3 things that make up God and country. Holding Christ's divinity as faith, arranging things to get to heaven after you die, and then straightening up your emotions and willing the good of another person. And that's what makes up a good citizenry. We were building this world in the United States after World War II, following in the footsteps of Aristotle and Plato. And according to them, there's something missing there. And it was Christ that fulfilled that. What changed when Christ came to earth? Well, that changed, among other things, I guess, that changed. And it's a very important thing. And so we're hoping you'll chime in and start putting numbers to this. I need this much money. When they talk about reparations here in the United States, and I'm sure everywhere else, they want you to pay the black guy reparations as an example, and the Indians reparations. The problem with that is they were already paid wholesale. Remember, in the United States, if we didn't get everything we wanted, we would have tore it all down, says Donna Shalala, the first black female Surgeon General. And for the violent overthrow of the United States government and replacing it with communism, says Angela Davis, now a professor at one of the California schools. They were quite successful at it. They got everything they wanted. And I just remember seeing Angela Davis just a few years back while they were having riots in the streets. And there she is in Florida, someplace, putting her fist in the air and trying to getting the kids to take to the streets and riot, even though she literally won everything they insisted on, and getting $30,000 a speech, by the way. What did they insist on? Well, individual rights, marching down the street, the leaders cashing in on everything and having all the sex and drugs they could get their hands on, and university tenure and being a professional consumer. And then they would smack their lips and decide that everybody else would go live in housing projects, individual rights. Black guys who live in housing projects in places like Chicago don't stand a chance. They have no fathers. They have their mothers don't know if you're coming or going. They graduate from school not reading or writing. And it's forgive me for this, like breeding a breed of dogs or a breed of, it gets worse over time. You keep getting worse at it. Communism, the communist Chinese have evolved from the Russian communists, and they're that much more ruthless and that much more of a scoundrel. And you don't have to do it you do it intentionally. In other words, what I'm trying to say is you don't stand a chance if you live in Chicago. Or for that matter, if you're a white guy and you found yourself living on a sidewalk in San Francisco with faded Peppermint Rainbow and John Lennon albums, wondering what in the world happened to you. They just did it. And so let's turn this around. We better do something before they die off, because quite frankly, they have some age on them. And they're the ones who caused it all. It was their choice, and they chose to cash in on everything. They chose to be as malicious as a human being could possibly get. So if you're listening to this and you're some gal who lives in a housing project in Chicago, you have a couple of kids and you don't know what in the world you're going to do, well, they got to start paying reparations to you. And that's that. And the same thing if you're that cutie pie gal in St. Louis or in San Francisco, or that gal in Tollsbury. There's enough of this. You have to go back to being a professional person, so to speak, in a very real way. You have to be that stereotypical Mrs. Miniver, the Yanks would say about the British common housewife. And then you got to start being bossy. Okay, I got to get my kid to school. This is how much it costs. Fork it over, bub. And you have to be a guy. They go together and they form a single person, and it's a guy version of this. But right now, it's so important for the gal to speak up, and it's up to you to at least get things started and be the professional consumer. And the same is true of the guy. If you work, you have a job, and a job is something that produces things. A job, and a plumber is a job. A farmer is a job. A professional tennis player is not a job. And you have to rearrange society back towards that ideal that United States was trying so hard to build and was so successful at it. Let me remind myself that so much of this stuff is Aristotle and Plato and the fancy stuff, but it's so much of it comes out of England. Or Great Britain. Great Britain pretty much polished all this stuff up. The judges here in the United States wore black robes because Catholic priests 500 years ago in Great Britain wore black robes. And they were writing the laws, those famous black stone books, if I got the story right, and everything else that was polishing all this up. And you have to go back to it. So you make an appeal to those British guys to straighten themselves up and then go back to work. The American Yanks after World War II would describe the British as one extreme or the other. They were either this General Alexander, who was, they would either describe themselves as the guy who plays the inspector on the movie Dial M for Murder. They're very ingenious, they're very ingenious, they're very smart, they're insightful, they know just what they're doing, and they're top of the class, as the British would say. And at the other side was a General Montgomery, and they didn't have too much to say about him. And he represented to the Americans the class of that were sort of inbred and inherited the ranks and that sort of thing. And one extreme or the other. So the idea is to get the good guy Brits back in there and go to work. If they invented everything, and well, push them up there and get them back in business. We don't talk about, it's common to say they must tax the rich, and the other guys say, no, we must not tax the rich, and that's all nonsense. They're not going to pay, let me remind myself, communism wants everything to be run by international corporations, and look how many people they have standing up for communism by trying to stand up against international corporations. It becomes silly. So you take both those arguments, you throw them out the window, and you come back over here. We have first Yanks, and then home economics, and then if Henry Ford can build a car, and he can build a big American car and put it in the driveway of that household, well, you push him to the top of society, and you rally around him, and you hit him up for work. willing the good of another person. That turns into a normal supply and demand curve. The Brits invented so much of that stuff, everything from the railroad and the thoughts that come out of it, the logic. They wrote so many of the books. And so it's important to get those guys back up there. And forgive me, you can just daydream. You can go on television and you can watch them argue in Parliament, and you can see two people arguing, and they could just sell tickets if they wanted to, and you wonder how good they are, and then you realize that it's because the words coming out of their mouths are associated with the thoughts inside their head, and that they know all the rules, and that they're normal, well-adjusted people, and they're arguing an argument. When they argue about putting a railroad down the middle of the country, or they should move it to one side or the other, or some such thing, they know what they're talking about. And all the arguments have to do with one person wanting to do things one way and one person wanting to do things the other. And you just stare at them. Boy, I wish I had some of that in me. And then there's the other group, and they sound like a bit brassy and obnoxious, and they don't have anything to say, but they know how to hustle, and they know these very blatant rules. And they're the people you just want to get out of the room and go back to work. They hustle for the sake of hustling. They're political dandies. They're the routine of a pimp. They don't lie. They just don't tell the truth. Yeah. So let me remind myself of all those debating tactics that are the same thing as a pimp uses to recruit a prostitute. You know the rules. Let me remind myself. A pimp recruits a prostitute by a three-stage process. Stage one, he isolates the gal and from her friends. She's usually down in some fashion. Her single parent, she only has a single mom, or she has to no money, and she has to find a place to live. And he keeps her, stage one, he keeps her from moving in one direction or another. So from the point of view of the gal, he stops her from physically moving here or here. Stage two, he touches her in some fashion, like this. He grabs her hand and shakes her hand, only this time he doesn't let go. And so now he's touched her he's violated those boundaries. And then he'll say something like this: I'm a real tough guy and I have a temper, and hey, I just don't know what I do when I have a temper. And then he might jump at the gal and say, right? And he forces the gal to agree with him. And the gal has to make this instantaneous decision. From the point of view of the gal, this guy's telling me I better be afraid of him or I'm going to die. I better go along with it because I can't beat him up. So I better act. But this is for real and my life is on the line here. So I better not act. I better become. And if she becomes, her attitude changes, and that's it. He's got her. How a pimp recruits a prostitute. It's just, we're being vain here. This is also true when it comes to international politics in countries. Remember, as a quick example, the Cuban Missile Crisis with the United States. And Cuba, the Russians pushed us to the brink of nuclear war. You have to put your life on the line and go all the way up to absolute extremes. And only if you take it to extremes, and only if you're bigger than them, and then they'll back down. They might huff and puff and go away and go find somebody else who's smaller and attack them. The routine of a pimp. It makes sense that people in Russia are just guys and rulers, and that's their tactic. If you want to have fun, if you can find an old Catholic Baltimore catechism, and during the commercials of a TV show or something, take out a piece of paper and write down the literal opposite. Don't gossip and don't talk bad about strangers, and write down its literal opposite. Find one thing and attack it. You're wearing that shirt with those pants. Oh well, you're an absolute scoundrel. So give me $20, and that sort of thing. They're very good at it. There's a nice long list, And you can see it's so prevalent now that it's silly. And the actualization of that, those people who are in charge cause poverty. And we're seeing it. We're seeing people living in the streets. You never saw people who are homeless here in Tucson. You just didn't see it. If I start walking north, I'll walk into a huge group of people who are just trying to find places to live. If I walk a couple of more miles up north, I run into the foothills and I run into all these exceptionally rich people who own property here in the valley, and they collect rent, and then they go live in the foothills. Here in Tucson, where this is being recorded, in the 70s, it exploded right in the 70s when all this started. So you can see things in a very literal sense. And nobody wanted houses to be built in the foothills. Tucson is surrounded by foothills. And nobody wanted houses to be built up there. Not the right-wing cowboys and not the left-wing hippy-dippy types. And there they are. They're there by the thousands. And you can find guys who consider themselves conservative living in the foothills and collecting rent. You can find lots of university professors. They had to do it because they could get away with it, they say. And you find lots of left-wing guys who fashion themselves left-wing, living in the foothills and collecting rent. And so if I take a step back, arrange things along the lines of the classic battle of good and evil, where the priest is a good guy and you're a normal, well-adjusted person, even though that goes against human nature and Mother Nature. And people who hustle are the very definition of what defines a bad guy. You realize that, well, the bad guys won, and that's just the long and short of it. We'll take a step back, and we'll arrange things so that the good guys start to win, hopefully. Well, it's been a good half hour now, and so it's up to you. It's been about a week of these, and so I hope you'll listen. Excuse me, someone will listen to this and start passing the word. We're desperate for have the gals to go back to being a home economist, and then calling in and start talking about home economics, getting us out of poverty into plenty. And we're desperate for the guys to start calling in and saying, this is what I do for a living, this is how much money I make, this is how many hours I have to go from where I am to where I need to go. And so we a few housekeeping rules. I had planned on Friday and Saturday at 2 o'clock New York time and 7 o'clock in Great Britain and 11. And then Sunday at 8 o'clock in Los Angeles and 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday in Great Britain. But those hours are changed to Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And hopefully Sunday will be the same and Saturday. And instead of Friday, it will be Monday for reasons, personal reasons. And then also we'll try and post videos, those short anecdotes on YouTube and on the YouTube channel. And I'll try find a way to put list the YouTube channel site so you and email address so you can email in. It's up to you. You're going to have to be a Yank without sounding corny and everything else. If you want to government other people, then you're going to have to stop, take a step back, and grab that three-cornered hat and fife and drum, and you're going to have to just insist on it. It's just the way it is. Well, good luck. We hope to see you.